Part 1, The Oath. The wind howled like a wounded beast across the ramparts of Château de Montfleur, dragging the scent of rain and iron through the stone corridors. It was the eve of All Saints' Day, 1191, and the castle's chapel flickered with candlelight, casting long shadows across the carved faces of saints who had long since stopped listening. Isolde de Bréval knelt before the altar, her hands trembling against the cold marble. Her gown, once a symbol of her noble birth, was damp and frayed at the hem, stained with the blood of a brother she could not save and the silence of a father who had bartered her future for absolution. She was 17, and already the world had taught her that lineage was no shield against ruin. Behind her, the chapel door creaked open. She did not turn. "Lady Isolde," came a voice, low and clipped, with the cadence of command. "The Grandmaster awaits." She rose slowly, her fingers brushing the silver crucifix at her throat. It had belonged to her mother, who died giving birth to a son who lived only long enough to curse the world with his final breath. Isolde had worn it every day since, a talisman against the unraveling. The knight who stood at the threshold was cloaked in white, the red cross of the Templars stitched over his heart. His face was shadowed beneath his coif, but his eyes, steel-gray and unyielding, met hers with a flicker of something unreadable. "Come," he said. She followed him through the winding halls of Montfleur, past tapestries that whispered of crusades and saints, past servants who bowed but did not meet her gaze. The castle had once been a place of laughter and feasts, of falconry and poetry. Now it was a tomb of secrets. They reached the solar, where Grandmaster Gerard de Saint-Aubin stood beside the hearth, his hands clasped behind his back. He was a man carved from stone, his beard streaked with ash, his eyes sharp with the weight of wars fought in both sand and sanctuaries. "You summoned me," Isolde said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Gerard turned. "You are the last of your line, Lady Isolde. The House of Bréval is extinguished but for you. And yet, your blood is not what interests me." She frowned. "Then what does?" "Your mind," he said simply. "And your memory." He gestured to a scroll on the table, its wax seal bearing the mark of the Vatican. "Your father was entrusted with a relic. A codex, believed to contain writings from the early church, dangerous writings. Heretical, some say. Illuminating, others believe." Isolde's breath caught. She remembered the nights her father locked himself in the library, the scent of old parchment and candle smoke lingering on his robes. She remembered the way he flinched when she asked about the book with the serpent etched into its spine. "He hid it," she whispered. Gerard nodded. "And now, we believe you are the key to finding it." The knight beside her shifted, his gaze never leaving her face. She felt the weight. "Oh. But you will," Gerard replied. "You must." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a murmur. "There are forces within the church that would see this codex destroyed. Others who would kill to possess it. The Templar order stands between them. And now, so do you." Isolde's heart thundered. "Why me?" "Because your father made an oath," Gerard said. "And now, you must decide if you will honor it." Outside, thunder cracked like a war drum. The knight turned to her, his expression unreadable. "If you accept," Gerard said, "you will leave Montfleur tonight. You will travel under our protection, but you will not be safe. You will be hunted. You will be tested." Isolde looked at the scroll, then at the crucifix at her throat. Her mother had once told her that faith was not the absence of fear, but the courage to walk through it. "I accept," she said. Gerard nodded once. "Then you are no longer Lady Isolde de Bréval. You are now a ward of the temple." The knight stepped forward. "I am Sir Etienne de Vauclerc." I will be your escort." His voice was colder than the wind, but something in his eyes flickered, recognition, perhaps. Or warning. "Pack only what you can carry," he said. "We ride before dawn." Isolde turned to leave, but Gerard's voice stopped her. "One more thing," he said. "There is a traitor among us. Someone who seeks the Codex for their own ends. Trust no one." She nodded, her pulse racing. As she stepped into the corridor, the torches sputtered in the draft, casting dancing shadows on the stone. Somewhere deep within the castle, a bell tolled midnight. And in that moment, Isolde knew, her life had ended at the altar, and something else had begun. Something dangerous. Something sacred. Something that would change the fate of kingdoms. The oath had been spoken. The storm had come. Part 2, The Forbidden Road. The moon hung low over Montfleur like a watchful eye, veiled in mist and prophecy. Isolde stood at the edge of the courtyard, her cloak pulled tight against the chill, her satchel slung over one shoulder. Inside it lay only essentials, a dagger, a flask of holy water, a worn leather-bound journal, and a single lock of her mother's hair braided with blue thread. Sir Etienne de Vauclerc waited beside two horses, his posture rigid, his gaze scanning the horizon. He had said little since the oath, and Isolde had not pressed him. Silence, she had learned, was often the armor of those who had seen too much. They rode out before dawn, slipping through the castle gates like ghosts. The road ahead was cloaked in fog, winding through the forests of Aquitaine, where wolves howled and bandits preyed on pilgrims. Their destination was the Abbey of Saint-Benoît, 3 days' ride south, where a monk named Brother Lucien held fragments of her father's correspondence. Letters that might lead to the Codex. The first day passed in wary quiet. Etienne rode ahead, always alert, while Isolde studied the landscape, moss-covered stones, gnarled trees, the occasional shrine nestled in the woods. She felt the weight of unseen eyes, the prickle of danger in the air. That night, they camped beneath a crumbling Roman arch. Etienne built a fire with practiced ease, his movements precise, almost ritualistic. Isolde watched him from across the flames. "You were in the Holy Land," she said. He looked up, his eyes catching the firelight. "Yes." "Did you believe in the cause?" He hesitated. "I believed in duty." She nodded, sensing the wound beneath the words. "And now?" Etienne's jaw tightened. "Now I believe in survival." The next morning, they were ambushed. It happened just past a bend in the road, where the trees grew thick and the path narrowed. A whistle pierced the air, sharp, unnatural. Etienne's hand went to his sword, but too late. A net dropped from the branches, entangling his horse. Isolde screamed as 3 figures emerged from the woods, cloaked in mud and leather, their faces masked. "Hand over the girl," one snarled. "She's worth more than your life." Etienne dismounted in a blur, blade flashing. The first attacker lunged, but Etienne sidestepped, driving his sword through the man's gut. Blood sprayed across the leaves. Isolde scrambled back as the second bandit grabbed her arm, yanking her toward the trees. She twisted, drawing her dagger, and slashed blindly. The blade caught flesh. The man held, releasing her. She ran, heart pounding, but the forest was a maze. Then, hoofbeats. Etienne thundered past, cutting down the last attacker with brutal efficiency. He dismounted beside her, breathing hard. "You fight well," he said, glancing at her bloodied dagger. "I fight to live," she replied. They buried the bodies beneath the arch, marking the graves with stones. Etienne said a prayer in Latin, his voice low and reverent. That night, Isolde couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire, staring into the flames, her thoughts tangled. Why do they want me? She asked. Etienne didn't answer immediately. He sat beside her, his cloak brushing hers. Because you carry something they fear, he said. Not the codex. You. She turned to him. What do you mean? He met her gaze. You are your father's daughter. And he was more than a nobleman. He was a guardian of truths the church buried long ago. Isolde's breath caught. You knew him? Etienne nodded. Briefly. In Jerusalem. He spoke of a prophecy. A woman who would uncover what men had died to protect. She laughed bitterly. A prophecy? That sounds like madness. Perhaps, he said. But madness and faith often walk hand in hand. The next day, they reached the Abbey of Saint Benoit. It rose from the mist like a fortress of stone and silence, its bell tower cracked, its gardens overgrown. The monks greeted them with wary eyes, their robes stained with ink and ash. Brother Lucien was old, his hands twisted with age, his eyes sharp as flint. He led them to the scriptorium, where scrolls lined the walls like sentinels. I remember your father, he said to Isolde. He came here seeking refuge. He left behind letters, coded, of course. He handed her a bundle wrapped in cloth. Isolde opened it, revealing parchment covered in strange symbols and faded ink. It's a cipher, Etienne said. Lucien nodded. One only she can break. Isolde stared at the pages, her mind racing. The symbols stirred something deep within her, memories of her father's voice, of lullabies sung in Latin, of stories whispered in the dark. That night, she sat alone in the chapel, the letter spread before her. She traced the symbols, murmuring the words she remembered. Slowly, the cipher began to unravel. One phrase emerged, the serpent guards the flame. She gasped. Her father had spoken those words once, in a dream. She had thought it nonsense. Etienne entered, his expression tense. We have to leave. Now. Why? The abbey is compromised, he said. One of the monks sent word to Toulouse. They know you're here. Isolde gathered the letters, her hands shaking. Where do we go? Etienne looked at her, his voice low. To the cloister of Saint Michel. Where the shadows speak. As they fled into the night, the abbey bell tolled behind them, echoing through the valley like a warning. And in the darkness, Isolde felt the road shift beneath her feet, not just forbidden, but fated. Part 3, The Night's Secret. The road to Saint Michel twisted like a serpent through the hills of Languedoc, cloaked in fog and the scent of pine. Isolde rode in silence, her thoughts tangled in the cipher she had begun to unravel. The serpent guards the flame. What flame? What serpent? Her father's riddles had always danced on the edge of madness and revelation. Sir Etienne rode beside her, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the horizon. He hadn't spoken since they left the abbey, and Isolde felt the weight of his silence like a stone in her chest. There was something in him, something buried deep, that both repelled and drew her. They reached the cloister of Saint Michel by dusk. It clung to the cliffs like a forgotten relic, its stone walls weathered by centuries of wind and prayer. The monks here were different, silent, hooded, their faces obscured. They moved like shadows, and Isolde felt their eyes on her even when they did not speak. Brother Thibaut, the prior, greeted them with a nod. You are expected, he said, his voice like gravel. The Grandmaster sent word. They were led to a chamber carved into the rock, lit by oil lamps and lined with ancient tomes. Etienne stood by the window, watching the sea crash against the cliffs below. Isolde approached him. You knew my father. You knew about the codex. What aren't you telling me? He didn't turn. There are things you're not ready to know. She stepped closer. Then make me ready. Etienne turned, his eyes storm dark. Your father was part of a secret circle within the Templar Order. They called themselves Custodes Lucas, Guardians of the Light. They believed the church had buried truths that could change everything. Truths about Christ. About Mary Magdalene. About the nature of faith itself. Isolde's breath caught. And the Codex? It's one of the last surviving texts from that circle. Written in a cipher only the Custodes could read. Your father was its last guardian. She stared at him. And you? Etienne hesitated. I was initiated. Briefly. Before I left the Holy Land. Why did you leave? He looked away. Because I broke my vows. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Isolde stepped closer. What vow? Etienne's jaw tightened. I fell in love. With a woman I was sworn to protect. She died because of me. Isolde felt the air shift. The pain in his voice was raw, unguarded. She reached out, her fingers brushing his sleeve. I'm not her, she said softly. No, he whispered. But you remind me of her. That night, Isolde couldn't sleep. She wandered the cloister's halls, the stone cold beneath her feet. She found herself drawn to the library, where ancient scrolls whispered secrets in forgotten tongues. One manuscript caught her eye, bound in black leather, its pages brittle with age. She opened it, and her breath stilled. It was a map. Not of land, but of symbols. Serpents. Flames. Crosses. A path winding through Europe to Jerusalem. She traced the route with her finger. It ended at a place marked only by a sigil, a chalice surrounded by thorns. Etienne entered, his cloak billowing behind him. You found it. She looked up. What is it? The path to the Codex, he said. And to the truth your father died protecting. Suddenly, a scream echoed through the cloister. They ran toward the sound, swords drawn. In the courtyard, Brother Thibault lay bleeding, a dagger in his chest. His eyes locked on Isolde. They know, he gasped. They're coming. Etienne knelt beside him. Who? Thibault's hand trembled as he pressed a parchment into Isolde's palm. Trust no one. Not even the order. Then he was gone. Isolde unfolded the parchment. It was another cipher, different from her father's, but familiar. She felt the symbols pulse beneath her skin. Etienne rose. We have to leave. Now. Where? He looked at her, his voice low. To Marseille. There's a ship waiting. We sail for Acre. Isolde's heart pounded. The Holy Land. The place where her father's journey began, and where hers would end. As they fled into the night, the wind howled through the cloister, carrying with it the scent of blood and prophecy. And Isolde knew, the night beside her carried more than secrets. He carried a curse. Part 4, The Cloister's Shadows. The ship to Marseille was a battered cog, its sails patched and its crew silent as tombs. Isolde stood at the prow, the wind tangling her hair, the parchment from Brother Thibault clutched in her hand. The cipher pulsed beneath her skin, as if it knew the sea would carry her closer to its truth. Etienne kept to himself, speaking only when necessary. His eyes were always on the horizon, as if watching for ghosts. Isolde had begun to understand that silence was his shield, and perhaps his penance. They arrived in Marseille under a veil of rain. The city was a cacophony of merchants, pilgrims, and soldiers, its streets slick with mud and ambition. Etienne led her through winding alleys to a monastery tucked behind the old Roman walls. The cloister of Saint Michel. It was unlike any holy place she had known. The monks here wore black, their hoods deep, their chants low and strange. The air smelled of myrrh and ink, and the walls were carved with symbols that made her skin crawl, serpents, flames, and eyes that watched without blinking. Brother Matthew, the archivist, greeted them with a nod. "You seek the truth," he said. "But truth is a blade. It cuts both ways." He led them to the crypt beneath the cloister, where the air was thick with dust and secrets. Scrolls lined the walls, some so old they crumbled out of breath. Matthew handed Isolde a manuscript wrapped in velvet. "Your father left this," he said. "He said only his daughter would understand." Isolde unwrapped it, revealing a page covered in layered ciphers. Her heart pounded. She recognized the symbols, some from her childhood, others from dreams she hadn't known were memories. Etienne watched her, his expression unreadable. "Can you break it?" "I think so," she whispered. They spent days in the cloister, poring over texts, decoding fragments. Isolde felt herself changing. Her mind sharpening, her faith deepening, her fear growing. The manuscript spoke of a relic hidden in Jerusalem, guarded by a sect older than the church. It hinted at a truth that could unravel centuries of doctrine. But the cloister was not safe. One night, Isolde awoke to whispers in the hall. She crept from her chamber, dagger in hand, and followed the sound to the scriptorium. There, she saw Brother Matthew speaking to a man cloaked in red, a cardinal. She strained to hear. "The girl has the codex," Matthew said. "She's close." The cardinal's voice was cold. "Then she must be silenced. The order will not tolerate heresy." Isolde gasped, and the floor creaked beneath her. Matthew turned, eyes wide. She ran. Etienne was waiting, sword drawn. "We've been betrayed." They fled through the cloister's catacombs, the walls closing in, the shadows alive. Behind them, footsteps echoed, monks turned hunters. They emerged into the night, breathless and bleeding. The city was asleep, but danger pulsed in every alley. "We need to disappear," Etienne said. "There's a caravan leaving for Acre. We'll join it." Isolde nodded, her hands trembling. "They want me dead." "They want what you carry," he said. "But they don't understand it." She looked at him. "Do you?" Etienne hesitated. "Enough to know it's worth dying for." They rode out at dawn, blending into the caravan of pilgrims and traders. Isolde wore a veil, her manuscript hidden beneath her cloak. The road to the Holy Land was long and perilous, but she felt the pull of destiny. As the cloister faded behind them, she knew the shadows had only begun to speak. And somewhere in Jerusalem, the flame waited. Part 5, The Blood Oath. The caravan wound its way through the scorched valleys of Provence, a ragged procession of pilgrims, traders, and mercenaries bound for the ports of the Mediterranean. Isolde rode beneath a veil, her manuscript hidden beneath layers of linen, her thoughts a storm of symbols and secrets. Etienne rode beside her, ever watchful, his hand never far from his sword. They reached the port of Aigues-Mortes at dusk, where the sea glistened like molten silver and the air reeked of salt and sweat. The ship that awaited them was a sleek galley, its hull painted with the red cross of the Templars. But it was not the order that had sent it, it was a rogue captain, loyal to Etienne, and bound by blood. Captain Renaud was a man of scars and laughter, his eyes sharp with mischief and memory. He embraced Etienne like a brother, then turned to Isolde with a bow. "So this is the girl who carries the flame," he said. "May God protect you, lady." They set sail under a moonless sky, the wind fierce and the stars hidden. Isolde stood at the prow, her fingers tracing the edge of the parchment. The cipher was changing, new symbols emerging, old ones fading. It was as if the sea itself was unlocking the code. On the third night, the storm came. It rose from the east like a beast, devouring the horizon. Waves crashed against the hull, lightning split the sky, and the crew cried out to saints and spirits. Isolde clung to the mast, her cloak soaked, her heart pounding. Etienne found her in the chaos, pulling her into the shelter of the captain's quarters. "You must stay below," he said. "No," she gasped. "The manuscript, it's reacting. I need to see it." He hesitated, then nodded. Together, they spread the parchment on the table, the candlelight flickering. The symbols shimmered, rearranging themselves into a map, one that led not to Jerusalem, but to a fortress in the Levant. A place called Qasr al-Sur. "The Castle of Secrets," Etienne whispered. "It's real." Suddenly, a scream echoed from above. They rushed to the deck to find Captain Renaud bleeding, a dagger in his chest. A cloaked figure stood over him, blade dripping. Etienne lunged, sword drawn. The assassin fought like a demon, his movements precise and brutal. Isolde watched in horror as steel clashed, blood spilled, and the storm roared. Finally, Etienne drove his blade through the man's heart. The assassin collapsed, gasping. "Who sent you?" Etienne demanded. The man smiled, blood on his teeth. "The church," he whispered. "The flame must die." Then he was gone. Renaud lay dying, his hand clutching Etienne's. "Protect her," he rasped. "Swear it." Etienne knelt, his voice breaking. "I swear." Isolde felt the oath settle over them like a shroud. It was not spoken to God, but to the dead, and it bound them in blood. They buried Renaud at sea, his body wrapped in linen, his sword laid across his chest. The crew mourned in silence, their eyes haunted. The storm passed, but the sea remained restless. Isolde stood at the prow once more, the manuscript clutched to her heart. She had lost another protector. Another piece of her past. But the path was clear now. Qasr al-Sur awaited. And with it, the truth her father had died to protect. Part 6, The Journey to the Holy Land. The harbor at Acre was a fever dream of chaos and devotion. Pilgrims wept as they kissed the sand, knights barked orders in Latin and Provençal, and the scent of incense mingled with the stench of blood and brine. Isolde stepped off the galley with her hood drawn low, the manuscript pressed against her ribs like a second heartbeat. Etienne followed, his sword strapped tight, his eyes scanning every rooftop and alley. They had survived the sea, but the land was no safer. The kingdom of Jerusalem was fractured, held together by fragile truces and the iron will of crusader lords. The Templars controlled the citadel, but whispers of betrayal ran through the streets like rats. Isolde felt it in the air, the tension, the watching, the weight of prophecy. They took refuge in a small hospice run by hospitallers, where the sick groaned in stone beds and prayers echoed through the vaulted halls. Etienne paid the prior in silver and silence. Isolde spent the night decoding the next layer of the manuscript, her fingers stained with ink, her mind burning with symbols. The map was clearer now. Qasr al-Sur lay east of Jerusalem, hidden in the Judean hills. A fortress lost to time, guarded by a sect that had vanished from history. The Custodes Lucas. But the journey would be perilous. The roads were plagued by raiders, and the Saracen armies had begun to stir again. Etienne secured horses and provisions, and they rode out at dawn, cloaked as pilgrims. The land was harsh, sun-scorched and unforgiving. They passed ruined villages, burned chapels, and fields littered with bones. Isolde saw children begging for bread, women clutching relics, and men whose eyes had forgotten hope. One night, they camped near a dried riverbed, the stars blazing above them. Etienne sat sharpening his blade, while Isolde traced the manuscript's final symbols. "You've changed," he said quietly. She looked up. "How?" "You're harder. Sharper. Like the codex is carving you into something else." Isolde swallowed. "It's not just a book. It's a mirror. And I don't know if I like what I see." Etienne met her gaze. "I do." The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Isolde felt the pull of him, his strength, his sorrow, his silence. She wanted to reach for him, but the oath he carried was a wall between them. The next day, they were ambushed. A band of mercenaries, hired by the church, descended from the cliffs. Arrows flew. Etienne fought like a man possessed, his blade a blur of fury. Isolde ducked behind a boulder, clutching the manuscript. One of the attackers found her, dagger raised. She screamed, and Etienne was there, driving his sword through the man's chest. But he was too late to stop the second blade. It sliced across his side, deep and brutal. He staggered, blood pouring. Isolde ran to him, tears streaming. "No, no, no." He collapsed into her arms, his breath ragged. "You have to go," he gasped. "Finish it." "I won't leave you," she cried. "You must," he whispered. "Swear it." She kissed his forehead, her voice breaking. "I swear." The mercenaries fled, their leader dead. Isolde dragged Etienne to a cave, tended his wound with trembling hands. He drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring in Latin, clutching her hand. That night, she sat beside him, the manuscript open, the final cipher glowing in the firelight. It spoke of a relic buried beneath Khazar al-Sur. A flame that could reveal the divine feminine, the lost teachings of Magdalene, the truth that could shatter empires. Isolde knew then, her father had died for this. Renaud had died for this. And now Etienne might die for it too. She would not let it be in vain. As dawn broke over the hills, she saddled her horse, packed the manuscript, and kissed Etienne's brow. "I'll come back," she whispered. "With the truth." And she rode east, toward the fortress of secrets. Toward destiny. Part 7, The Desert of Trials. The Judean wilderness stretched before her like a parchment scorched by divine fire, endless, unforgiving, and sacred. Isolde rode alone now, her horse weary, her cloak stiff with dust. The sun carved shadows across the rocks, and the wind whispered in tongues older than scripture. She had left Etienne behind in the cave, his wound bound, his breath shallow. Each mile she rode felt like betrayal, but the oath she had sworn, to him, to her father, to the truth, demanded sacrifice. And the codex pulsed with urgency, its symbols shifting with each passing hour, as if the land itself were unlocking its secrets. By the third day, her water was gone. Her lips cracked, her vision blurred. She stumbled upon a ruined cistern, its stones etched with faded Latin, Fiat Lux. Let there be light. She drank from the brackish pool, then collapsed beneath a fig tree, the manuscript clutched to her chest. Her dreams were fevered. Visions of Magdalene walking barefoot through fire, of serpents coiled around chalices, of Etienne bleeding beneath a crimson sky. She awoke to chanting. A procession of robed figures moved across the ridge, their faces hidden, their voices low and rhythmic. She rose, staggering toward them. "Please," she rasped. "I seek Khazar al-Sur." The leader turned. His eyes were pale as bone, his skin weathered. "You carry the flame," he said. "Come." They led her through a narrow pass, into a valley veiled in mist. There, carved into the cliffside, stood the fortress, Qasr al-Sur. Its towers were crumbled, its gates sealed, but the air thrummed with power. Inside, the custodes Lucas awaited. They were few, men and women cloaked in white and gold, their eyes ancient, their hands ink-stained. They welcomed her not as a stranger, but as prophecy. "You are the daughter of Bréval," said the high custodian, a woman named Salome. "The one foretold." Isolde trembled. "I don't understand." Salome led her to a chamber deep within the fortress, where a flame burned in a glass chalice, untouched by wind or time. "This is the light of Magdalene," she said. "It has burned for centuries, waiting for the one who could read the codex." Isolde opened the manuscript. The symbols shimmered, then dissolved, revealing a final passage. "She who walks through fire shall awaken the truth. Not in stone, but in blood. Not in silence, but in love." Salome placed a hand on Isolde's heart. "You must face the trials. Only then will the flame reveal its truth." The trials were brutal. She fasted for 3 days, her body racked with visions. She walked barefoot across burning sand, reciting verses in forgotten tongues. She was buried in darkness, forced to confront her deepest fears, her mother's death, her father's silence, Etienne's wound, her own longing. On the final night, she stood before the flame. "Speak," Salome said. Isolde stepped forward, her voice trembling. "I am Isolde de Bréval. I carry the blood of truth. I seek the light not for power, but for healing." The flame flared, then dimmed. And then, images flooded her mind. Magdalene teaching in secret, her words erased by men who feared her. A gospel hidden beneath the temple. A lineage protected by women who bore the truth in silence. Isolde collapsed, weeping. Salome knelt beside her. "You have seen. You are ready." But before Isolde could speak, a horn sounded from the cliffs. The fortress was under siege. A battalion of black-cloaked knights rode into the valley, bearing the seal of the Papal Inquisition. Their leader, a man with a scarred face and eyes like ice, raised his sword. By order of the Holy See, he roared, "The heretic shall be taken." Isolde rose, her body trembling, her heart ablaze. She had walked through fire. Now she would fight. Part 8, The Hidden Manuscript. The siege came like a thunderclap. Isolde stood at the ramparts of Qasr al-Sur, her cloak whipping in the wind, the flame of Magdalene flickering behind her in its glass chalice. Below, the valley churned with black-cloaked riders, inquisitors bearing the seal of the Holy See, their banners soaked in blood and righteousness. Salome's voice rang out across the battlements. "Seal the gates. Hide the flame." The custodes Lucas moved swiftly, their robes trailing like wings. Isolde was ushered into the inner sanctum, a chamber carved into the mountain itself, where the walls pulsed with ancient energy. There, beneath a slab of obsidian, lay the final secret. A manuscript. Not parchment, but vellum, thick, golden, etched with ink that shimmered like starlight. Isolde's hands trembled as she lifted it. The symbols were familiar, yet deeper, older. This was no mere codex. It was a gospel. "The Gospel of the Flame," Salome whispered. Written by the Magdalene herself. Hidden for centuries. Protected by blood. Isolde's breath caught. "Why me?" "Because you are the last of the line," Salome said. "Your mother was custodes. Your father, a guardian. You are the convergence. The manuscript spoke of a divine feminine, of balance, of healing, of truths buried beneath dogma. It told of a union between Magdalene and Christ, not of sin, but of sacred love. It named women as apostles, as keepers of wisdom. It was heresy to the church, salvation to the seekers. Outside, the fortress shook. The inquisitors had breached the outer wall. Salome turned to Isolde. You must take it. Escape through the catacombs. Ride to Jerusalem. There is a vault beneath the church of Saint Anne. Hide it there. I won't leave you, Isolde said. You must, Salome replied. The flame must survive. She pressed a ring into Isolde's palm, a serpent coiled around a chalice. This will open the vault. Isolde fled through the tunnels, the manuscript wrapped in linen, the ring heavy in her hand. Behind her, the fortress burned. She heard screams, steel on stone, prayers turned to curses. She emerged into the desert, the stars blazing above. Her horse waited, tethered to a fig tree. She rode hard, the wind slicing her cheeks, the manuscript pulsing against her ribs. But she was not alone. A rider followed, swift, relentless. She turned to see the scarred inquisitor, his eyes gleaming with fury. You cannot outrun truth, he snarled. I'm not running, she said. I'm protecting it. They clashed beneath the moonlight. Isolde fought with dagger and desperation, her movements fueled by fire. The inquisitor struck her shoulder, but she drove her blade into his thigh, sending him sprawling. She fled again, bleeding, breathless, but alive. By dawn, she reached the outskirts of Jerusalem. The city shimmered like a mirage, holy and haunted. She slipped through the gates, cloaked as a pilgrim, and made her way to Saint Anne. The church was quiet, its stones cool, its air thick with incense. She found the vault beneath the altar, the ring fitting perfectly into the lock. Inside, she placed the manuscript, sealing it with a prayer. And then she collapsed. She awoke in a hospice, her wound bandaged, her body aching. A familiar voice called her name. Etienne. He stood at her bedside, pale but alive, his eyes filled with relief and something deeper. You did it, he said. She nodded, tears spilling. The flame is safe. He took her hand. And so are you. But outside, the church stirred. The Inquisition had not fallen. The war for truth was only beginning. And Isolde knew, the manuscript was hidden, but its light could not be buried forever. Part 9, The Betrayal. Jerusalem shimmered in the morning haze, its domes and spires gilded by sunlight, its stones heavy with centuries of prayer and blood. Isolde moved through the narrow streets like a shadow, her wound healing slowly, her heart still raw from the fire of Khazar al-Sur. The manuscript was hidden, sealed beneath Saint Anne's altar, but the truth it carried burned within her. Etienne remained close, his presence a quiet anchor. They spoke little, but their silences had grown softer, threaded with something unspoken, something fragile and forbidden. The city buzzed with rumors. The Inquisition had tightened its grip. Templar strongholds were being searched. Whispers of heresy spread like wildfire. Isolde knew the manuscript's safety was temporary. The church would not rest until the flame was extinguished. They sought refuge in the Armenian quarter, in a house owned by a merchant loyal to the custodes. There, Isolde continued decoding fragments from memory, transcribing symbols into a second copy, one she could carry if the vault was ever breached. One evening, Etienne returned from the citadel, his face grim. The Grandmaster is dead, he said. Poisoned. They say it was an inside betrayal. Isolde's blood ran cold. Who? Etienne hesitated. No one knows. But the order is splintering. Some believe the custodes are behind it. She stared at him. Do you? He didn't answer. That night, she awoke to footsteps in the courtyard. She crept to the window and saw a figure cloaked in white, Templar robes. The man slipped into the house, moving with purpose. She followed silently, dagger in hand. In the study, the figure knelt before the hearth, prying loose a stone. Behind it, parchments. Her transcriptions. Stop, she said, voice low but firm. The figure turned. Etienne. Her heart shattered. You're stealing them, she whispered. He rose slowly, his face unreadable. I'm protecting them. By hiding them from me? He stepped forward. You don't understand. The order is collapsing. The Inquisition is coming for you. If they find these, they'll burn you alive. So you betray me first? Her voice cracked. I swore to protect you, he said. Even from yourself. She backed away. You lied. You said you believed in the truth. I believe in you, he said, voice breaking. But I also know what the church will do. They've already killed for less. Tears blurred her vision. You should have trusted me. I did, he whispered. But I also know what it means to lose everything. She turned and fled into the night, the city closing around her like a fist. She ran through alleys and markets, past pilgrims and priests, until she reached the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. There, beneath the ancient dome, she knelt and prayed, not for safety, but for clarity. And then she felt it. A presence. She turned to see a woman cloaked in crimson, her eyes dark and knowing. You are the flame, the woman said. But even fire can be deceived. Isolde rose. Who are you? A custodes, the woman replied. One who never left the shadows. She handed Isolde a scroll. Your father wrote this before he died. It speaks of a second manuscript, hidden not in stone, but in flesh. Isolde unrolled it, her breath catching. It was a genealogy. Her own. She was not just the daughter of Bréval. She was the last descendant of Magdalene. The flame was not in the codex. It was in her blood. She staggered back, the truth crashing over her. And in that moment, she understood why Etienne had betrayed her. Not to steal the manuscript, but to protect her from what she truly was. Part 10, The Siege. The bells of Jerusalem tolled like a dirge as the first arrow struck the outer wall of St. Anne's Church. Isolde stood in the nave, her breath shallow, her fingers wrapped around the hilt of her dagger. The manuscript lay hidden beneath the altar, sealed in the vault only she could open. But the Inquisition had found her. The scarred inquisitor, Father Severin, had returned, his army of zealots swarming the city like locusts. Etienne burst through the side door, blood on his tunic, his sword already drawn. They've surrounded the quarter. We have minutes. She nodded, her heart pounding. The vault is sealed. They won't find it. They don't need to, he said grimly. They want you. Outside, the streets erupted in chaos. Pilgrims screamed. Merchants fled. The faithful clung to relics as if they could shield them from steel. The Inquisition moved with precision, burning homes, dragging suspected heretics into the square. Etienne led Isolde through the cloisters, down a hidden stairwell carved centuries ago by monks who feared persecution. The passage opened into the crypt, where the air was thick with incense and dust. We hold here, he said. Until the custodes arrive. She turned to him, her voice low. If they don't? He met her gaze. Then we die protecting the truth. The siege lasted 3 days. By the second, the church was half ruined. Arrows pierced the stained glass. Fire licked the rafters. Etienne fought like a lion, his blade singing through the air. Isolde tended the wounded, whispered prayers over the dying, and kept the vault sealed. On the third night, Father Severin breached the sanctuary. He strode through the smoke, his robes untouched by ash, his eyes gleaming with fanaticism. "You are the flame," he said to Isolde. "And I am the hand of God sent to extinguish you." She stepped forward, dagger raised. "You serve fear, not faith." He laughed. "Faith is obedience. And you are rebellion." Etienne lunged, but Severin was faster. Their blades clashed, sparks flying. Isolde watched in horror as Etienne faltered, blood blooming across his chest. "No," she cried, rushing to him. Severin raised his sword. And then, the bells rang again. Not in warning. In triumph. The custodes had arrived. Clad in white and gold, they descended like angels, their swords flashing, their chants rising. The Inquisition faltered, then broke. Severin turned to flee, but Salome was there, her blade swift and final. He fell, eyes wide, mouth silent. Isolde cradled Etienne, tears streaming. "Stay with me." He smiled weakly. "You're the flame. You lit the way." Salome knelt beside them. "The manuscript is safe. The truth will rise." Isolde looked around, the ruined church, the fallen zealots, the surviving faithful. And she knew, this was not the end. It was the reckoning. Part 11, The Choice of Love and Faith. Jerusalem had quieted, but only on the surface. Beneath its sacred stones, the city trembled with secrets. The siege had ended, the Inquisition scattered, and the manuscript remained hidden in the vault beneath Saint Anne's altar. But Isolde knew peace was a fragile illusion. The truth she carried, etched in blood, sealed in prophecy, was too powerful to remain buried. Etienne recovered slowly, his body marked by the battle, his spirit quieter than before. He walked with her through the gardens of the hospice, where olive trees whispered in the wind and doves nested in the eaves. Their silences had changed. No longer tense, but tender. No longer guarded, but aching. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting gold across the rooftops, he took her hand. "I swore to protect you," he said. "But I never expected to love you." She turned to him, her heart thundering. "And I never expected to be loved." They kissed beneath the fig tree, where the stars blinked awake and the air smelled of jasmine and ash. It was not a kiss of triumph, but of surrender, two souls bound by fire and fate, choosing each other in the ruins. But love was not simple. The custodes gathered in secret, their numbers growing. Salome summoned Isolde to the crypt, where the flame of Magdalene still burned. "You must choose," she said. "To reveal the truth, or to protect it." Isolde stared at the chalice. "If I reveal it, the church will fall." Salome nodded. "And many will suffer. But others will awaken." Etienne stood beside her. "If you protect it, you live. We live. But the world remains blind." Isolde felt the weight of generations pressing on her shoulders. Her father's oath. Her mother's blood. The manuscript. The flame. The prophecy. She looked at Etienne. "If I choose truth, I may lose you." He took her hand. "Then let me choose with you." They rode together to the Mount of Olives, where the city spread below like a tapestry of faith and war. There, beneath the ancient trees, Isolde read aloud from the second copy of the manuscript. She spoke of Magdalene, of sacred union, of the divine feminine. Her voice carried on the wind, reaching pilgrims, priests, and wanderers. Some wept. Some fled. Some listened. The church responded swiftly. Edicts were issued. Heresy declared. But the flame had already spread. Copies of the manuscript appeared in Antioch, in Rome, in the libraries of Córdoba. The truth could not be silenced. Isolde and Etienne fled Jerusalem, traveling under false names, teaching in whispers, healing in secret. Their love became legend. Their story, a song passed from village to village, cloister to cloister. And though they never returned to Montfleur, the castle where it all began, Isolde carried a piece of it in her heart, the oath, the fire, the choice. She had chosen love. She had chosen faith. And in doing so, she had lit the world. Part 12, The Eternal Flame. Years passed, but the memory of Jerusalem never faded. Isolde de Bréval lived quietly in the hills of Occitania, beneath a sky that once bore the banners of crusaders and now bloomed with lavender and peace. Her name had become legend, spoken in whispers by scholars, sung in secret by mystics, feared by those who still clung to the old order. She no longer wore the robes of nobility, nor the veils of secrecy. She taught in gardens and candlelit chapels, her voice soft but unwavering. Her students came from every corner of Christendom, women and men seeking truth beyond dogma, yearning for the light she had carried through fire. The manuscript remained hidden beneath Saint Anne's altar, untouched but not forgotten. Copies had spread, smuggled in satchels, etched into memory, passed from hand to trembling hand. The church condemned them as heresy. But the flame had already leapt from page to soul. Etienne stayed by her side. His wounds had healed, but the scars remained, on his body, and in his heart. They never married. They never needed to. Their love was not bound by law or ritual. It was forged in battle, sealed in silence, and written in the stars. One autumn morning, as the mist curled through the valley and the bells of Montségur rang in the distance, a rider arrived. He bore the seal of the custodes Lucas. Salome had died. The order was changing. A council had been called. And they wanted Isolde to lead. She stood beneath the fig tree where she and Etienne had first kissed, the parchment of her father's oath in her hands. She remembered the chapel at Montfleur, the blood on the stones, the fire in the desert, the siege, the betrayal, the choice. She turned to Etienne. "If I lead them, I'll be hunted again." He smiled. "Then we'll ride again." She accepted. Under her guidance, the custodes became more than guardians. They became healers, teachers, poets. They built sanctuaries in the mountains, libraries in caves, gardens in ruins. They taught that faith was not obedience, but wonder. That love was not weakness, but revolution. And though the church continued its crusade against the flame, it could not extinguish it. Because the flame was no longer a manuscript. It was a woman. It was a choice. It was a legacy. Isolde died in her sleep, wrapped in linen, her crucifix resting on her heart. Etienne followed weeks later, his final breath a whisper of her name. They were buried beneath the fig tree, where the wind still carried the scent of jasmine and ink. And above their grave, carved into stone, were the words, "She walked through fire and lit the world." If this story moved you, inspired you, or sparked something deep inside, don't forget to like the video to support the journey. Comment below, your thoughts matter. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's coming next. Your voice keeps this flame alive. See you in the next video.